indigenous people of Monterey County. All enrolled tribal member ancestors are identified to San Carlos Borromeo de Carmelo mission and Nuestra Señora de Soledad mission's original records. We acknowledge the tribal government and respect their spiritual roles today in their cultural heritage beliefs that are important to the living Ohlone, Costanoan, Esselen Nation people. So again, welcome to everyone joining us today. I'm honored to introduce to you a good friend of mine, Miho. Miho was born and raised in Tokyo and has lived her adult life in the United States. She brings her lived experiences and practices from the East and the West to the work of equity, inclusion, and diversity in the outdoors. Her approach is rooted in cultivating self-care, love, and awareness that is fundamental for both personal and collective transformation towards a more just society. Miho is an intersectional environmental educator, activist, scientist, filmmaker, and outdoor athlete who's been advocating for the protection of the most vulnerable people and for the planet. Her award-winning short film, The Sacred Place Where Life Begins, Gwich'in Women Speak, advocates for the permanent protection of the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge from the Gwich'in women's perspective. So Miho, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll pass over the microphone to you.
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Lawrence, and thank you everybody for being here today. And I really want to appreciate beginning this space by having this official acknowledgement of Indigenous communities and people in Monterey. And I know that Lawrence actually, got the official words from the local Indigenous community and the words that they would like Lawrence to use. So I really appreciate that approach and always working together to make sure that we communicate in the words and with an intention that the Indigenous communities would like us to use. So thank you for the extra work. And I hope that we all can learn from that practice. And I also want to make sure that when we actually do land acknowledgement, I really want that to be something that's authentic for all of us. And for me, as an outdoor environmental educator, I always try to think about the ways that every day, how I'm gonna actually connect with the place I live, and also ways that I can give back to the land. That just one everyday simple practice that, I do. So I would love everybody to just think about, the way that, in order to acknowledge the traditional territory of Indigenous people, of places where you live, I would love everybody to also build your own connection to the place that you live. And I'll get to that in my presentation. I also wanted to just acknowledge that, this is a time of global pandemic. And in California, where I live, we have so many wildfires. And I know that some folks may have to be evacuated. Some folks may, got sick on their own, or may have family members, community members, really feeling this toll of these impacts, along with another global pandemic. I think it's been used, this term, for a while now, that systemic racism that's been existing, for over 500 years globally. So I also just want to acknowledge that people are coming from all over the places, from your own lived experiences, the current, situation. So I really want us to really make sure you take care of yourself even during this presentation. So I see folks turning off the video. That's great. If you want to lie down and listen to it, that's fine. I have a slides that I want to share, but it's up to you. If you want to look at it, if you just want to listen to it, I just would love you to just take care of yourself. And also some folks may be having lunch. That's perfectly fine too. So in order to take care of other people in the community, we have to take care of ourselves first. So with that, I just wanted to just ground ourselves before we begin. So the way that I usually do is just make sure like whatever that, you might be sitting, you might be lying down, like I just try to find my feet really connected to the ground. You might be wearing shoes or slippers or, whatever, but like find a good, like a grounding spot. Just imagine like you are part of this planet, right? And not just imagining, but you are part of the planet. So just grounding my feet and feeling the seat, because I'm right now sitting. So the seat and then my buttock just touching the seat. And like my spine just go through toward the crown of my head and the crown toward the sky. And then just like inhale and give this like good, like a deep breathe out. That sound. And I will do 2 more times. Inhale. Breathe out through your mouth. One more time. Thank you. I naturally just close my eyes, and it's just a way for me to just ground myself. And hopefully that helps you to ground yourself too. So thank you so much for being here with me today. Again, my name is Miho. And as Lawrence introduced to everybody, I was born and raised in Tokyo, Japan. And it's a Japanese tradition for parents to give a name with the characters that represent their wish embedded in the names of the kid. So my name actually means a protector of people, culture, and environment. And it's interesting how I ended up kind of living true to my name, and I turned out to be an environmental educator, and that has been my career for a long time. So I think I just want to give an honor to my parents first for giving me that name. And I'm just going to do a screen share for that slides so you can meet my parents. Okay, so that's how I spell my name. And can somebody put in the chat and let me know if you can see the Google slide?
Oh, yes, we can see your slide.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Yeah,
Yeah,
so here they are, my parents, and that's how I spell my name in Japanese. And I don't know if in our audience, if you have a name that also have some meanings. I love asking this question when I actually have students coming to, when I have my own students. So I think like, I'll just go to the next slide here. Okay. Let's see. Hold on just a second. Here we go. Okay. So I've been working, just a little bit of my background and where I am. So as you can see, this is Golden Gate Bridge, just north of San Francisco. I am in a traditional territory of Ohlone, Graton Rancheria, and a Coast Miwok people. The place is known as Marine Headlands in Golden Gate National Recreation Area. And I've been working for this organization called Nature Bridge for about 20 years. And you can see myself with a group of students. And in our audience today, we have Laura, Lawrence, and Alejandro. These are my former co-workers, also worked at the Yosemite Nature Bridge campus. And so that's my job. My day job is to take a group of students, and we do 2 jobs. So one is to help them connect with the natural world, and 2, to inspire responsible action to sustain our planet. So this is something that I've been doing for a really long time. And then today I'm going to be talking about Arctic Refuge Advocacy in Action. And through the film that I made, it's called Guchan Women Speak. And then you might be thinking about, okay, this person's from Japan and lives in, San Francisco Bay Area. So what's the connection, between, Arctic Refuge? So I always think about really like something that's really important is to really think about connections through a sense of place, like developing a sense of place. And what I mean by that sense of place is like not just a place, but your social and emotional connection to the place as well. So I would just love to just start this presentation by thinking about and asking this question: what are the connections between the Arctic and you? And I want to spend a little bit time for you to develop a sense of place, first where you are, to just kind of check in with yourself, but also to kind of think about, what's my connection to the Arctic? So I have a few questions for you. And the first question is let's just start from where you are. So what relationship and a connection do you have with a place where you call home? And I know people are calling in from so many different places. So I just didn't want to make an assumption. Monterey is the place where you are all coming in. So when you think about where you call home, what do you see? What do you hear? And who's there? And what feelings do arise when you think of the place and people? So we can make it a little interactive here. So you can go ahead and type in the chat if you would like. Yeah, what do you see? What do you hear? Who's there? What feelings do arise when you think of the place and the people? Deep connection to California, Northern California specifically, oak trees, golden rolling hills, rivers, and oceans. Annie said family, warmth, sense of community, open spaces. And I'm just gonna read this not in order. I'm just gonna see what I see in here. I think of family. Mia said sense of belonging, comfort, family. Megan says cooking with 2 stars on it. Alejandro said I see the ocean. Hear calming humming, I feel ease when I'm home. So the sense of ease, the feeling of ease, like something that's probably come from this place of home. Emily said, so much green in the water, ponds, rivers, lakes, mountains, sycamores, hemlocks, maple trees. PA-VT, I wonder if that's Pennsylvania and Vermont. Yeah, maybe you have 2 homes. Molly said fish and berries, food. Heather said, it was my closest friends and a family anywhere in the woods or by the ocean. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. There's something about, there's always this component of nature, your family and friends, this sense of like warmness and ease and comfort. I think that's something that many of us may share. So the next question that I have, because we'll be talking about the Arctic today, have you been to Alaska or the Arctic? And have you read a story, watched the media, or listened about the Arctic? And if not, can you imagine what is it like? And what do you see? What do you hear? Who's there? And is there any connection do you see between where you are and Arctic? Or maybe between the people you know or yourself and Arctic? So you can go ahead and type in the chat again. Yeah, what do you see in a connection? Okay, so the chat's coming in. Rachel said, big thing for me is the migratory birds, migrating birds, whales and orca that range from here to Arctic. Yeah, that's a one connection through migratory birds. The Arctic actually has over 200 species of migratory birds, and all the birds actually migrate to all 50 states. And I know if you're in Monterey, you probably see whales and humpback whales. Particularly, they migrate. I think gray whales too migrate between their ranges here in the Arctic too. So connection through nature. Alejandro said, I have not been. My immediate connections are the cold, farness, wildlife species to the area. Nancy said, I think of how the ocean connects us. Yes, the ocean connects us all. So if the ocean connects us, so what else are we connected through? Yeah, Megan said, nature that has to work hard for survival, harsh winters, yes. Emily said, my uncle used to live in Alaska, but the connection for me is much harder to find. It's not tangible, but much more abstract. The extinction of species, languages, and cultures, as well as global climate collapse, which comes back to affect me in my very far away world. Yeah, Emily, thank you for just bringing up just a common challenges that we all have. Particularly around the global climate collapse, that words that you used, if I can just use that. The Arctic definitely is one of the most potent and immediate impact that they would feel. So I think when I also ask this question to middle schoolers, that's something they always talk about. The climate change is something that impact all of us, but particularly what happens at the Arctic, it's going to impact us eventually. And it connecting through the weather, the ocean. So they talk about that a lot too. And also you mentioned the languages and the cultures. Both places have indigenous communities, and I think particularly up in Alaska, the indigenous presence is still very, very strong. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Esther said, my close friend from grad school grew up there, studied there, and always wanted to return, and she did. Okay. Lauren thought of oceans too. Archie said, I spent a summer work in Denali a few years ago, and I constantly miss Alaska. Yeah. Great. So thank you so much for sharing. It's coming a lot. And I thank you for just naming all of these connections. I think it's for me as an educator, it's really important for us to just ground ourselves for the places that we're going to be talking about today. And I don't know if we have any birders here, and I just kind of like listed all the birds that migratory birds between the Arctic and the Bay Area. So these are some of the birds that I see in where I live, and I always think about when I see them, particularly right now, red-necked phalarope. I see them here. So I think of them, I think of Arctic when I see them. So the place I'll be talking about today is Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Yay, birds. Yeah, I have some bird lovers here. Yeah, great. Okay, that's great. You see these birds in Monterey Bay. Yes, we have a connections here too. Okay, so to just give you just a visual of the place I'm talking about today. So in Alaska, up in the northeastern corner of Alaska, that is Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is 19 million acres. And just like at the northern end of that area, it's called Coastal Plain. That's about 1.2 million acres. And today's conversation is particularly about that area and around the indigenous community called Gutchen. People, they call that place as their sacred place. And that area has been threatened by oil development since 1985. So the journey I'm going to take you through today is how I've connected with these Gutchen people and how I became a filmmaker to support their work, to get their messages out through their voice. And when I think about my role, is always like I always love connecting with people and listening to their stories. And again, at the beginning, Lawrence talked about I'm an intersectional environmentalist, which what means is that I incorporate all these 5 other things, film and storytelling and adventure and social emotional learning, advocacy work, environmental science and education all together to really help people to develop a sense of place with the Arctic. Because I know from the educator perspective, if people are connected to the place and the people, then people care. And if people care, they want to protect it. So that's my approach, and that's kind of been my guiding principle in how I want to exist in this world. So the beginning is all the way back to 2008 as an immigrant, as somebody who speaks English as a second language. And I'm an Asian American, a Japanese person. So when I entered this environmental education field, I hardly ever saw somebody like me. I'm talking about 20 years ago, who looked like me doing outdoor sports or environmental works in books and the media. And I want all girls and women to see role models who look, sound, and live like them, so that they know what kind of outdoor careers and leadership opportunities and adventures are possible for them. So I started this project. It's called If She Can Do It, You Can Too, empowering women through outdoor role models, and really use interviewing these different women around the world and sharing their stories, so that, in a way that people can be inspired to see some of the role models that people can relate to. And working with Nature Bridge, I always wondered, because we are in a national park and we tell stories of the public lands, and I always wonder about where are the voices of women, especially Indigenous women, who are and have been stewards of the land we now call national parks or public lands. And I've been thinking about this question for a while, and in 2010, maybe some of you are familiar, the National Parks America's Great Idea, Best Idea, the PBS series came out. And these are the voices that were represented, and again, didn't really answer my question. So I asked Nature Bridge for a time off, and I actually did my homework to find today's environmental role models who identify as Indigenous women and working to protect our public lands. So I connected with Sarah James. She is an elder of the Gutchen Nation. And on the left top corner, you can see Gutchen Nation's flag. What animal do you see? You can type in the chat. I wonder if anybody can identify this animal. Yes, Archie, caribou, yes. So they're known as a caribou nation. So their way of life, their the original story, they're all, and their physical, cultural, spiritual needs, everything actually, comes from caribou. So they're known as a caribou nation. So I basically just made a cold call to Sarah James and introduced myself. And I said to her that, I've known about this, threat of development of Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, but, I didn't know anything about, Gutchen Nation's connection to that area. And I'll be really interested in interviewing you. And maybe there is a way that I can support your work. And she's like, who are you? And I'm like, I'm Miho. I am interested in interviewing you. Then about 20 minutes, she said, okay, well, maybe you can come up here and you can stay in my sister's cabin and we'll talk. So I was like, okay, then I look up on the Google map and where she lives in Arctic Village and realize that there's no road to get there. Fairbanks is the closest I can get to. Then I had to take a small bush plane to actually get to her village. But it's just interesting how it worked out. So the first thing I learned from Sarah James was that, as I mentioned earlier, Gutchen people are known as Caribou Nation. So traditional homeland of the Gutchen people in this map is highlighted with purple. And before they're colonized, they're nomadic people. So they actually followed this caribou herd. It's called porcupine caribou herd. And they just follow the migration pattern of the porcupine caribou herd. And you can see the northern part doesn't really overlap. And also, after the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge was established, you can also see how the refuge itself overlaps with the traditional Gutchen territory. And then, she talked about the reason our range doesn't overlap with the northern part of the porcupine caribou herd is because that's where they go give birth to their youngs and raise their youngs. So that's a sacred place because we have to protect the caribou, which is our bloodline as a Gutchen nation. So then she talked about the place where caribou give birth to their youngs, raise their youngs, is actually a proposed drilling area. So as an indigenous community, she talked about this is the indigenous rights and basic human rights for the Gutchen people, and that kind of the indigenous narrative is not well represented in the mainstream environmental media. So she actually welcomed me, and I just basically listened to her for about 3 weeks, and in the end of third week, she actually invited me to the Gutchen Nation gathering, where 10 villages in Alaska and 5 Gutchen villages in Canada, they choose one place to gather every 2 years. And she asked me to come there. And she said to me, maybe you can interview other Gutchen women and maybe you can make a film. In that moment, I was like, wait a minute, I am an educator. I'm not a filmmaker. I don't have a right equipment. I don't have, experience to do the work that she's asking, but I had to say, yes, I'm honored to do that. And then after I said that, I was like, oh no, how am I going to do this? So it's just the way I live. Sometimes I just be very open to the invitation, and I just trust my gut. If that's an invitation that feels right, and I'll just try to take the challenge. So this is one of the moments. And without saying yes to her, I won't be talking to you today. So it's just so interesting how sometimes the universe really, connects people. And sometimes like this unseen connection that we have. And I'm just so grateful her invitation to work with her. So with her encouragement, I actually connected with all these Gutchen women. I talked to 5-year-old, to the elders, and on the left picture, it says protect. In the left bottom, that's a caribou antler. To the right is a salmon. The Gutchen village near the water, they also have a subsistence lifestyle based on the salmon too. So, and each dot is actually a person. So this is at the Gutchen gathering on one of our few last days. We had a helicopter flew over us and it took this like human art photo. So that was my time. And then I basically spent next 3 summers really learn about how to edit, how to get the permission for the footages I don't have a right to use. And there's just so much behind the scene work. And I just have so much respect right now for the filmmakers to create something that that people can watch. Just so much unseen labors that go behind the scene. So I know Lawrence put the link to this film. It's 19-minute short film. So you're welcome to watch it if you haven't had a chance to it. And thank you for dropping the link in the chat, Lawrence. I appreciate that. The other thing that as I was, making this film and listening to, Gutchen women, I realized that it's also a climate justice and a climate science overlaps the messages that I can also deliver with this film. And this is just a quote from Robert Richmond, director at UH Manoa Kewalo Marine Laboratory. The decisions we make over the next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years are going to decide the trajectory for the future. And mention that this is the first time we've really tried to make this quantum leap to move from science to policy, right? So unless a policy change, we're not really able to make the huge leap. So that's again an inspiration for me to really think about how can I actually also use this film and use scientific knowledge as a part of the advocacy work. I wonder if there's an opportunity for me to, add to being an advocate, not just for the indigenous rights, but also the climate policy. And in terms of climate justice issue, this is just a couple of photos from the Arctic community. This is actually not the Gutchen community. This is, I think, the coastal community, the Nupiat folks. You can see the permafrost melting, so the homes are, just really like a tilting to the right, and then just, ice melting, it really impact their livelihood, still rely on a lot of hunting, and that's just a way of life, and worldwide, just a really devastating issues. And as you can see, the majority of the impact is actually on the people of color. So again, like a racial inequity and injustice is also mirrored here, even before COVID-19. So the systemic oppression shows always up in a time of crisis. It's a really good reminder that we need to fight for the systemic change. And I also thought about, okay, I am nobody, so how can I actually advocate in a way that very untraditional to get attention? So I am a cyclist, so I decided to go on to a bicycle film tour. So I finished the film in 2013, and 2014, I didn't have any support, but I decided to do this spontaneous Seattle-San Francisco 1,000 mile for 1,000 LIs bicycle film tour. So on the way, I did a film screening at the state parks, and then there are some libraries and organizations supported me to host a film screening. I had a portable film screening kit in the trailer that I had, and some people may not really care about the film itself, but showed up because they wanted to see the setup that I have at the campground. So it was just an interesting way to attract some audience at the campground screening. And I think because of this, and I also reached out to large environmental organizations like Alaska Wilderness League and the Sierra Club, the next year, I actually got a lot of support. And they asked me to go on to, DC to Maine, another 1,000 mile film tour. And that was a huge success. I actually had a chance to, again, on the top left corner, you see Sarah James, and she's getting an award from the Wilderness Society. Had a chance to meet with former President Clinton and also former Secretary of Interior Sally Jewell to the right. So we had a really amazing tour in 2015. What a difference between 2014 and 15, having a lot of support and a lot of exposures to the important issue that we face. 2016, we had this book published. It's called We Are the Arctic. And we changed our campaign to really focus on President Obama to use his executive order to create the Arctic National Monument, which didn't happen, but that was just a one campaign tactic that we used. And then last year, the Sierra Club actually asked me to ride in Texas. And I'm like, why Texas? And it's an oil capital. So we changed our strategies from political campaign to corporate campaign, visiting BP office, one of the seismic testing companies called SA Exploration. We visited these offices, delivered letters, as well as visiting the congressional representative as well. And it was so hot. It was flat, but it was so hot. You see to the bottom left, just me just overheating. I don't usually take any selfie, but I thought it was kind of pathetic. So I took a snap photo of myself. Just didn't even have a shade much. So, but I had a really great time, actually. Texas was beautiful. So that was the last year. So then to just give you an update, this year, 2020, it's just been very challenging year. And just a couple of weeks ago on August 17th, actually, to be honest, it was just a big surprise. The administration finalized its plan to open Arctic Refuge drilling. The reason I'm saying it's a surprise is because the oil price is actually pretty low. The fact that, you know, the consumption, domestic consumption went down due to COVID-19. And this is something that we just didn't see it was coming. There's just not much interest in drilling right now. But in terms of what happens next in this movement, there's no comment period associated with the record of decision. So record of decision means that it's pretty much final decision to go ahead. And this actually marks the beginning of a litigation. And a separate administrative process must now begin to initiate lease sale. And earliest possible lease sale would be October. So the Sierra Club, who is my nonprofit sponsor, and they have a really strong team dedicated to Arctic, working directly with the Gutchen Nation. So they're actually putting together some of our, the campaign that, you know, will take place. So how do we fight back? A lot of people ask us this question. So one, continue focus on the corporate campaign. And two, like Arctic Refuge Defense campaign. There's a social media campaign that's happening, and I'll make sure to share all the links at the end of this presentation. And the last one, lawsuits against administration. These lawsuits actually take a really long time. So it's not the most effective things, but just for you to know, there are over 15 organizations, including Gutchen Steering Committee, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting their sacred land, with support of so many other environmental organizations filed a lawsuit as of today, as you know, to this date. So let me just talk a little bit about a corporate campaign. So we are actually going to focus on Chevron. Chevron is really the one of the companies that actually is showing interest, and they're also based in the San Francisco Bay Area, where a lot of activism actually already exists. So we're just going to try to mobilize, including indigenous organizations, to really target the campaign to Chevron. So first, we'll be directing calls from indigenous leaders and conservation organization executive directors directly to Chevron leadership. And Bernadette, the director of Gutchen Steering Committee, she's actually planning to have a call, if not this week, next week with the Chevron leadership. And the second, we'll buy up various ad space in the Bay Area, around the San Ramon, Richmond area. And what you see here, this is something that we did for a BP campaign. And this is, then by the way, BP actually polled and made a public statement that they're no longer interested in drilling, not just Arctic, but anywhere in Alaska. So the BP campaign was really successful in a way. So we're going to do something similar for Chevron. You can see Black Lives Matter face covering, and then there's something that we're gonna try to do something similar, protect the Arctic face masks to our core volunteers and a base, particularly in the Bay Area as part of our public education campaign. And then lastly, we'll be forming a social media team to call our Chevron's greenwashing posts and hold them publicly accountable. So they have this corporate sustainability report, and they actually have a not so strong social media presence. So I think that's one way that we might be able to actually, one way that we can hold them accountable publicly. So these are some of the strategies that we have. And also, we're going to keep the pressure up on financial institutions. So right now, like we have Bank of America is actually one of the last financial institutions who said that interested in drilling the Arctic and hasn't drawn themselves from that. So Sierra Club actually started this email campaign this week and asking the public to join that email campaign. So I'll make sure to share that link in the chat as well. So that is what's happening in 2020. And then since Reagan administration in the past over 30 years, that all Republican president, tried to get in and drill the Arctic, and we've been able to actually defend with so many friends and organizations and a community support. And something that's different in the past 10 years since I've been involved is really to make sure that, we put the Guchan Nation first, and how other organization, the people like me, can, really help to amplify the Indigenous perspective and a voice. So that's kind of my approach to this work. And I think now I'm just going to open up for the questions. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen. So.
Yeah, I'm going to, what do you think, Lawrence? We just, I'm going to just allow people to unmute and just let people pop in, or how do you want to run the
Yeah, Lawrence, do you have some structure usually?
I think if folks, whatever they feel comfortable, if the big Zoom room is intimidating, go ahead and put your question in the chat and we'll monitor that. And why don't we start that way? Unless somebody has, I feel like I see in Manchesky's eyes a question. No, you're the only one who put your video back on, so so I wanted to call you out. No, yeah, so feel free to join us here with your videos on if you're comfortable. That way we can have more of a dialogue or conversation for the last 12 minutes that we have together. Hi, Kat.
Yeah, sorry, I just put the email campaign. I didn't put the space in there, so let me just put just a link. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, any questions, comments? I welcome any feedback as well.
I have a couple of questions. Sorry, Rachel, if you want to. I always have a couple of questions, so I can hang on. So one is, your campaign centers around changing kind of corporate responsibility, but it obviously mobilizes kind of the greater population to put that pressure on. So I'm curious what your personal thoughts are in terms of corporate social responsibility and environmental responsibility versus the individual. I think that's a big discussion all environmentalists have. So I'll start off with that question.
Yeah, so I always think about it's important to do both. So like a individual action, that's something tangible, even a little student, like a young student can do. And I'm recently really into bees. And then when I think about, they're a social being, right? But then like an individual bee works really hard to get 1/16 of a teaspoon of honey, which is so insignificant, right? but as a colony, like they make enough for the colony to survive. So when I kind of like think about our, our strategy to really think about creating a social change, I try to look into nature and see what they're, what kind of like wisdom we can gain from them. Because I think it's easy when I think about my personal impact, it's easy to go into this rabbit hole to think about it's not significant. Like, I don't know if I'm making any difference. And then maybe not, but maybe I am. But then when I look at the bee, like, I don't think they ask the question to themselves. They just get to work and they just collect 1/16 teaspoon of honey. And they're not even doing that for themselves. Like, they only work for like a month, and then they're doing for the, sisters they never gonna meet. So, that's kind of my approach to, like, yes, like it's important to think of systemic, like big picture, and then like hold the corporation accountable and like organized, work to really be part of that as an individual. And also, I think everybody has their strength. So I'm just using my strengths to kind of like, how can I fill a niche that may have not been filled? So that's kind of like my approach, I guess. Does it make sense? Am I answering your question?
Yeah, you are. Thank you.
Yeah, Katrina, thank you for the question. And the reason like we're really, doing a corporate campaign is because, one, we know that they actually care. Well, yeah, they care about profit, right? Like, we're on a capitalistic, capitalism, right? So they have to make money, and they need to make a good public impression, and they're gonna face significant amount of public opposition. We have like millions of Americans actually are not in for the drilling for the Arctic. So I think like right now, like in like a political campaign, like it just really like it's hard to do, especially like the elections coming in like a couple of months. And if we can actually stop the corporation to actually bid, like that's, to us, that's more like successful way to do that. Yeah, thank you. I'm just trying to read the chat. So Elizabeth is asking, are there ways in which you are able to stay connected with the Gujin community to keep adding to the story? Great question, Elizabeth. I'm actually still connected with the Gujin community, and Elder, I actually interview and spend the majority of time Sarah James. I think she wants me to be her friend. I think like a lot of times she just wants me to call her to just say hi. And she always like, you haven't called me. I thought we were friends. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. So that's like, another way to kind of like, okay, that's right. Like she always talked about, doing a good way, no compromise, stay united. That's like a Gujin, elders' messages to the future generation. And I'm trying to respect that, but really like they want me to, also like stay connected in a way that's more informal. And keep adding to the story piece. Like, I think like it's interesting, even this interview I've done is like 10 years ago. It's still very relevant. And I've been kind of like waiting for the, maybe, these younger women I interviewed, they might ask me to, hey, now I'm in middle school. Like I look like 5-year-old in your video, but would you video me again? Like, they haven't asked me that, but one of them who was in high school actually came on a Texas film tour with me last year. So that's one way. Like we're just trying to get real, it's weird if I say real, but actual Gujin women to be part of the tour. And I think that's just like a best strategy to actually, people to meet them, have them share, because my film doesn't really share a lot of like what their day-to-day basis life is. and they can speak to that. They can talk about, this is actually what I eat. This is the hunting season. This is what we, you know, when we go collect berries, like people are really interested in more of the, you know, lifestyle that they have. So they can also talk about that, and coming from them directly is so much more powerful. So that's just one way that we're continuing to deliver the story that's still relevant to today. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Can I jump in really quick? If we want to come join you in a protest in the San Francisco Bay Area, is if we add our name to, you know, the mailing list of the Arctic Refuge Defense Campaign, will we be notified, or how? What's the best way for us to
so that's
join you in the
probably
fight?
the best way. Yeah, Rachel, thanks for sharing that. So the Arctic Refuge Defense Campaign, and I'll try to put Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I think these are the 3 social media space that they're just constantly updating. So if you just go to these 3 social media and type in Arctic Refuge Defense, then it will pop up. And that's probably the easiest way for you to be engaged if we, you know, going to actually do like a San Francisco Bay Area based campaign. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to keep my eyes on the chat. So I just
have another question, if you don't mind.
Hold on just a second, Katrina. Katrina,
Yeah.
hold on just a second. Let me just see what came in before you. So I just make sure that I give opportunities for other people who haven't had a chance. So Megan asked, I think you mentioned the youngest Good Channel woman you interviewed was around 5. I was curious if you remembered any intriguing insight she had to her land and people. Yeah, so even little kids, they didn't really say like long sentences or anything, but they just said things like, don't hurt animals. You know, like they just know. And they even have a lot of kid art. And one most powerful political tools I found is actually handwritten letter from 6-year-old, right? 7-year-old, because they're not really interested in money. They're not interested in, you know, being seen as an activist or anything. Like they're just very authentic and really honest. And some of their words are just like go right to the heart of the politicians. So I found that. And then one interesting thing, like when I was interviewing this 5-year-old, because I just kept rolling my camera, then I had to ask a lot of questions for her to tell me more. And then the first question I asked her was like, if you see a caribou, like, you know, what would you like to do for the animal? And she said, kill it. I was like, what? Like, kill it to eat. Like, okay, this is amazing. Like, she's already connected to her way of life, right? Like, she's a caribou girl. But like, that's just like, but if I put that without the context, then like, you know, like it's not good footage to put in. So I didn't put in a film, but I mean, like, you know, these are just, you know, things that I heard, very authentic voice from a 5-year-old. Yeah. Katrina, yeah, do you have another question?
Yeah, I'm curious what your view is on offshore, because your expertise and activism at least lies within Arctic and perhaps because of that offshore energy development. And I'm curious about your position on offshore wind development and other renewable energies and how they have kind of historically excluded underrepresented communities and peoples, and how companies might do a better way at reinvesting in the local community for the betterment of the global community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't know much about like offshore renewable energy issues. And I think what I just heard you said is that it's really important to include the community that is directly impacted by any kind of project, right? And that's like, to me, that's a very simple step, and at the same time, often just totally forgotten. So I think, what you just said is, I would really make sure, like, I don't know, like, what your work is, but, if you are in a position to, do a work of like a community litigation, or, facilitating that kind of like consent-based, decision-making process for all the stakeholders, I think it's just really important to include, all the people who are directly impacted by. And, now I'm just talking, through the eyes of equity, and not to count all voices equal, right? Like, I think it's really important, like, as a result of this development, who's going to be impacted by the most, and what is their current and historic, story around oppression? Like, I think that has to be counted. So yeah, that would be my approach. And I think it's any kind of, not just development, but any kind of community work with good intention. I think we need to take that approach. Yeah. Anybody else who hasn't had a chance to ask questions or comment?
The educator in me is letting this this Zoom pause linger. And I'm also looking at the time, and I'm being conflicted as a grad student. I'm like, we got to stay on schedule, but my heart does not want to leave this Zoom room. So I'm gonna keep the pause going. Molly, there was another question in the chat.
Oh yeah. Can you speak to any experience the campaign has had with the NUPIA? Yeah, along the coast, I know that the lone coastal village near Anwar stands for Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Kaktovik is not as unified against drilling as the Guchen for a number of reasons. Yeah, so there is this, the NUPIA, that's another, like the coastal, like indigenous community next to the Guchen Nation. And then near Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And there is the Alaska pipeline that runs from the Prudhoe Bay, and they actually went for drilling. They basically took a very different approach, whereas Guchen is actually opposing as an entire nation. So I think your question is about, yeah, so that's the history that I know that they took. And within Kaktovik, it's a tiny village there, and there are definitely individuals who are still against the drilling. And in fact, they have a different caribou herd. The central caribou herd is in that in their territory. And I think the article that Lawrence shared on the speaker page actually talked about the recent USGS report, says that, it really did this central caribou herd actually avoid this development area. But again, like, it's one thing, this is kind of like a really complicated issues among indigenous communities, particularly in Alaska, right? Like, there's so much of oppression that they've experienced, that they continue to experience. There's not much local economy, since they're colonized. Like, they don't even have the traditional function of the society, right? So they're all existing within the current system. So the economy is a big issue. So the indigenous communities have taken away their way to manage their own, like, a governance, right? So when the community is presented with this opportunity to get the cash, right, I think it's really difficult for indigenous communities to say no to that. and a corporate and a government knows that's a tactic to use to split the indigenous communities, and that's being used for Lakotas. Like there's so many places that it happened. So for the case of Nubia, that's what happened. So a lot of local people work at the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, the area. They talk about, the duck migration has changed due to that. They know they can't drink oil. They can't eat money, but that's just what the nation chose. So there's a little bit of that, like a tension within a community. So it's actually, when I think of Gutchan Nation, that's just really rare. As a whole nation, they actually agreed to say no to this development. And I think that itself is a story for inspiration for a lot of, indigenous nations around the world. Yeah. So, okay. I think Lauren shared the page that has the film and the related articles. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And I think there are large environmental organizations have millions of dollars to actually do this work. And if you have some financial, if you want to make some financial contribution, that's some people may look for that. You can actually contribute to Gutchan Steering Committee. I'll just type in here, Gutchan Steering Committee. Tiny nonprofit. And you can Google it, and then you can directly donate to them if you have some financial means. Yeah, other environmental organizations have a lot of money to do their work. So if you're looking for a way to financially contribute, that's a good place to contribute. Yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah, Miho, thank you so much for joining us today. My heart is happy, and I think I'm gonna have a smile on my face for the rest of the day. I've been looking forward to this for a really long time, and I hope that we can continue to have this conversation, and that you will be welcome back at the Middlebury Institute anytime. So with that, I'll give a virtual round of applause to Miho.
You can all unmute.
Yeah.
Unmute.
Thank you.
Let's hear the cheers. Thank you, Miho.
I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, and I hope I can go on another bike tour next year. I've been doing this for past 6 years, and this is like supposed to be the 7th year, but for apparent reason I couldn't go. So hopefully next year. Yeah.
I hope so too. That's a great way to get the publicity, and it's just what a great, amazing physical feat.
Yeah. Okay, everybody give yourself a hug.
Aww.
You're loved. Okay, well, enjoy the rest of your day, or get rest, or whatever you need. Please take good care of yourself.
Thank you. May I call you really quick afterwards, just to a quick follow-up?
Okay, do you have my number?
I do, yes.
Okay, good. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye.